All right, welcome back. Next, we're going to work on this main section at the top, calling it the showcase or the header, but whatever we call it, it has a background image that actually goes behind the nav bar, and that's a little trickier than you might think. There's also an overlay that you can't really detect, but this image is brighter than what we're actually seeing. So I dimmed it by putting a div that has a slight black tint to it on top. So we could do that in Photoshop and make, our own, just make the image dimmer, and that's honestly the easier way of doing things. But I want to show this because often people like to do overlays on websites, and it just adds a little complexity to the project. So there's actually a div on top that is changing the color of this background image, but we'll get there. Then we also have our text. This is a different font. We have a button. This is a primary button, so this color comes up quite a bit. This is the primary color that I assigned. So we're going to also set that up here. So that's our goal, but of course, this is the reality. And we're going to start by coming down in our HTML. After our nav, let's make a section and give it an ID of showcase. And then in our section, we don't have very much. There is a div with a class of overlay that we will come back to. So that is, for now, going to just remain empty. Well, it's actually always going to remain empty, but we're going to use CSS to make it an actual overlay. But then inside of that, we have a section or a div that I just call header. And this is actually where we add the container. So we have a container, and I'm also going to do text white and text center. And inside of that, we add our H3. This one is going to have a class of display 5. I just played around with the different sizes. And it says modern camping. There we go. So that's our first bit of text. Next, we want to say Aurora Grove. All right. So that is an H1, and it has the class of display 1 and the text of Aurora Grove. Cool. So there's that. The next thing is a paragraph with the class of lead with just some lorem ipsum text. And actually, you'll notice that this text does go away on a small or on an extra small size. So we will come back to that. But let's put some lorem ipsum in there for now. And after that, we have a button. And this button is a primary button. So button, BTN, it's also large, BTN primary. And as far as the spacing and the border, the rounding, we'll come back to that. So I'm just going to do a regular button for now. And it says book now. Okay, so our pieces are in place. So where do we start? Well, we need to change the color of the button and the shape. Also, there's some extra padding on the sides here. We need to position things a little better. Notice that there's less space here in the final result. Modern camping is right on top of Aurora Grove. An easy win is to make this text show and hide so that it disappears once we get to extra small and small. And we can do that by just finding the text, which is right here, and giving it the class of display none, D none, but then say, just kidding, once you hit medium, go back to block. So we tell it never show up, but then, okay, once you get to medium, it's okay to show up. And I'm demonstrating the wrong thing, but now you can see here, it's not there, and then it shows up on medium. Okay, the next thing that we can tackle is changing our color. Let's change our primary color. So we're gonna go to the file that we haven't been working in very much, custom bootstrap. This is where we import bootstrap, and then inside of our main SCSS file, we import this file along with our custom file. So I'm gonna override the default color, and we do this by typing theme-colors. This is one way at least, and we feed in a list of colors. And for now, we'll just do primary, and the color that I used is 36B3A8. 36B3A8. Okay, and save. Oops, no semicolon. Just broke everything. There we go. So we now have the color showing up correctly. And the next thing we'll do is go back to index.html. Actually, we're going to go to our custom CSS file and alter that button a little bit. And we need to give a background, that image, to this entire section. So that's an easy place to start. So let's do that now. I'm going to leave my media queries at the bottom. Otherwise, I'm going to go basically section by section as far as organizing this entire file. So it's called showcase. And inside of the showcase, well, the first thing we can do is just give it a background. And we can give it that image. So I'm going to do background URL. And the image itself, let me full screen here, is located in, let me shut some of this down, we got a lot going on, inside of the images folder, and it's called main.jpg. So we should be able to reference it at images slash, actually we're inside of the CSS folder, so we need to do / images / main.jpg. And this is the moment of truth. All right, it's officially working. Now it looks terrible, but it is in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually give a minimum height to the showcase itself. So it's just min-height. And I think I did 700 pixels. Let me just double check. Yes, 750. And that gives us the correct height. Now we also need to worry about the positioning of the image. This is not looking good. So we can actually set it at the same time we're setting the background itself. We're just going to write bottom center / cover no dash repeat. And that should give us, there we go. If you're wondering what the heck that is, what we're doing here is telling it how to align the image. So this all has to do with how we're positioning the image. Bottom and center refer to how we're actually, what's a good way of putting this? Where the image is being positioned. So if the image is super large, too large for this, are we going to prioritize showing the bottom of the image? Are we aligning it with the left side of the image over here and the right side gets cut off? Or are we going to center it so that maybe some of the left and the right gets cut off? Same thing with top and bottom. I chose bottom. Oh, where did that go? Because the TPs are at the bottom. I don't want those getting cut off. The sky can get cut off, but I always want to see this. Anyway, no repeat also tells it that if it didn't cover, it shouldn't repeat and tile. But this is a large image. We shouldn't run into that problem. So the next thing that I did is I changed the font of this H1 here. This is actually a different font. So I included 2 fonts. So I'm just going to select inside of the showcase. I'm using Sass here, so I can do a nested CSS selection. And I'm just going to say font family is now Questrial is the name of it. Quest, R-I-A-L. And does it change? There we go. So it changes, it's a slightly different font. I am not a typography person. I just found a website that lists some nice combinations of fonts, and they recommended using this as a heading font and using this as your main font. Okay, next, let's get this to position vertically in our showcase div. And using Flexbox, that's really nice and easy. What we can do is go to our container here, and I'm realizing now I gave this a class of header. I want to give this, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to give it an ID of header. That's not a Bootstrap class. That's something I'm going to use to refer to it later. So the next thing we'll do is make our section a Flexbox. So give it display flex. And then now that it's a Flexbox, we can justify content center and we can align item center. So justify content center isn't going to do much for us. And we already have everything text aligned center, so we technically don't really need that. And then align item center is the important one. This works on the cross axis and it aligns things like that. So it aligns them vertically, and we're centering it vertically and horizontally in Flexbox. Okay, so now there's a couple minor things that have to do with the spacing of our actual items. What I did was I removed the bottom margin on this modern camping. So that's right here. So margin bottom 0. And then one other thing, I went into the H1, so this H1 here, and I set its line height to be 1. Okay, so now there's much less space there. We also need to style the button, and we can do that. We could just select button inside of the showcase, but in case we had more than one, I'll give the button an ID, and I'm just going to call it book, the book button or book now or something. And then in our CSS, we'll select that ID And all we need to change, one thing, is the font size. So font size is 1.5 REM. Just made it larger. And I also gave it a border radius of 2 EMs or REM. And that gives us those rounded edges. But there's also spacing, as you can see there, and that's just done with padding. And I just went into the button itself and gave it padding X, which I rarely use, but the left and right side of, I think it was 5. Yeah, so that adds padding on the left and right, and our button is done. Now, the last thing I'll address here is that, I don't know if you can tell, but I actually shrunk the height of the showcase once we get to a smaller size. You can see where it goes to right now versus right there. It jumps further down. And I just felt that I was taking too much space up on mobile. This is just too big. So I also changed the font size of our main H1 just using a media query. So we'll go to our CSS. We already have our medium query or media query written. So I just wrote showcase. Inside the showcase, I gave it a new min height of 500 pixels. So it's just not quite as large right there. It shrinks down. And then I also want to change the font size of our H1. And I did font size 4 REM. And you can see it shrink. There we go. And it takes up less space. So it's looking good. Next, we're going to work on making our navbar transparent. Well, it's already transparent, but making our showcase go behind it. And then also adding the overlay in. But that will be a separate video. This is getting a little long. So we're done for now with our showcase.